one thing that we do know from the research is that women's responses to the birth control pill are very idiosyncratic, and meaning that they're very unique to each woman, right? So the pill that you are on is probably going to influence you in different ways than it would influence your best friend.
The public story is it's all fine, very, very, side effects are kind of this many women out of this many. In a way, there's a bit of shame in even talking about it.
If you choose to take birth control, if that's really the right decision for you, that's your choice. But it's only fair that you get all the information up front, about whether it's really fixing your problem, because I feel like in the large majority of cases, it's not fixing the problem. It's muting the problem.
The pill. Who hasn't been offered the birth control pill? Some of us love it, and some of us hate it. In my 20s, it helped me with finishing grad school, starting my career, traveling, and overall living worry-free about pregnancy. Little did I know that this tiny pill would present me with such hardship once I stopped taking it. While traveling down this road, I learned so much about some of the challenges that women face, the struggles, the side effects, and the discouraging patient care that we so desperately seek. The pill is popular because it's 99% effective in preventing pregnancies. We've been told that it can also help other symptoms like acne, bloating, and cramps. 98% of women will be on a hormonal contraceptive at some point in their lives. It is considered a societal norm. But the pill also shapes the way we form our ideas about womanhood, not only in America, but all around the world. As women, are we given the tools to understand what we're committing to? Or is it our responsibility to do our own research? Pill companies take up pages in teenage magazines, but it doesn't stop there. With social media on the rise, it seems more than ever its availability is literally at our fingertips. Ads on social media forums will allow virtually any user to subscribe to an online order of their birth control plans without seeing a doctor. But what about our vulnerable youth? Or even older women who take the birth control pill? According to the CDC, in the US alone, 14% of American women are on the birth control pill. Over 1.6 million of them are teenagers between the ages of 15 and 19. Over 3.5 million are women between the ages of 20 and 49. With so many women being on the pill, I'd like to share my story with you and the story of so many others. After being on the pill for almost 3 years, I decided it was time to come off. After I took my last pill in January of 2017, I threw out the pack and continued on with life. Just 2 months later, almost to the day, I woke up and felt very weird. I had tingling in my fingers and in my toes like pins and needles. My arms and leg muscles felt weak. I was extremely depressed. I kept getting feelings of not knowing who I was. I had brain fog. I couldn't think straight. I felt like I wasn't even in my own body. I felt like I was standing outside of it. I thought maybe I was tired. So I waited to see if something would change. But as the week went on, loud noises hurt to listen to and light bothered my eyes. At times, I would wake up in the middle of the night ready to run a marathon. I was really thirsty and extremely exhausted. But the absolute strangest symptom I had was as if my body was vibrating, like bees buzzing up my spine and into my head. After waking up one night, I started researching. Things like multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, brain tumor, cervical spine fluid, and cancer were the results of my research. Of course I panicked, so I decided to go to the closest walk-in clinic the next morning. At the time, I was 25 years old, a nightly kickboxing instructor, a healthy eater, a non-drug user, and had regular physicals every year. I always came back with a clean bill of health. My normal resting blood pressure had never been higher than 115/70. But when the doctor took my blood pressure that day, it read 145/110. That blood pressure read is usually seen in middle-aged, overweight people on the verge of a heart attack. This doctor was baffled by the symptoms, but decided it was all just anxiety and prescribed me a healthy dose of Xanax. I decided to go to yoga instead. As I sat there and meditated, I thought very hard about what had changed in my life. And then it hit me. I stopped taking the birth control pill. But that couldn't be it. That was 2 months ago. It really doesn't make sense. But then again, it was the only thing that had changed in my life recently. It was the only significant thing that can truly affect my mood and maybe even these weird physical symptoms. I've always heard of people experiencing side effects on the pill, but never coming off of it. I realized I had to do some research on my own. I came across this one blog that nearly saved my life. I call it the Emily blog. Emily, the creator of this blog, had almost the exact same story as mine. She had the same symptoms with the same timeline. She went off the pill and life was pretty good. Me too. Then, about 2 months later, it started. I was getting lots of tingly sensations, a buzzy feeling. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I scrolled down. Guest 5 wrote, "Off the pill 2.5 months ago, and I am going through a similar thing." I kept scrolling. Sea Dog wrote, "I am having the same problems. So glad I found this forum. I got off of my birth control almost 3 months ago. How long does this last? I hope it ends soon." Even boyfriends were writing in. There was also another thing in common. Most of these women were even getting brain scans, and all were coming back negative. But the biggest commonality was that their doctors said it couldn't be the pill. But we all knew the truth. How do so many women struggle with the side effects of coming off birth control, and yet there's no research? Even the experts, our doctors, seem unaware.
So unfortunately, really, I think this is what's the complication is when it comes to research and, conventional medicine and women's rights, is that the symptoms are really wide and varied, and it could be a number of things. If somebody says I have hair loss versus heartburn versus my cycle is irregular, you may not tie those three things back to the birth control pill. You may be thinking 3 different areas of the body or 3 different things you have to work up, when in fact the cause could be one thing. It could be the birth control pill.
When they're presented with a package of symptoms, they essentially, work under a 1 pill per 1 ill kind of model. And so they're very well, trained to identify a symptom and select the right medication to alleviate the symptom. So I think a lot of it just has to do with the system.
I was shocked that I had found a group of people with the exact same stories and no answers. So I scheduled an appointment with my OBGYN, hoping I'd come back with information for my fellow bloggers. So I waited, and I waited, and waited, only to be told I couldn't film my exam, even though they were my legs up in the air. So instead, here is my very accurate reenactment of how that appointment went. After telling the doctor my wacky symptoms, I proceeded to ask, is there anything that can happen to a woman when she comes off of birth control? Is there any reaction that the body can have? My OBGYN replied, No. If anything, birth control was helping you with these symptoms. Anything that's happening right now, anything that you're feeling is because you're off of the pill. I paused and thought, that's hard to believe. I felt fine before birth control. Not that I thought she was lying to me. I just thought, maybe she must have been absent the day they taught this in medical school. So I challenged her and said, well, I've never felt these feelings before. Or have I ever had these problems? I'm thinking something is hormonally unbalanced in my body now. She responded, "The pill was helping balance whatever that is. You should go back on it if you're feeling this way. You know, the pill doesn't last in your system past 24 hours. So anything that you're feeling isn't from the pill if you've been off it for a month." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I, like all of the others, wasn't trying to say that there were remnants of the pill in my body. Even I knew that it metabolizes after 24 hours. That's why you have to take it every day. What I was trying to tell her was that I felt the pill had thrown off all of the hormones in my body, and because of that, I was experiencing these very odd and unique first-time symptoms coming off of it. So I gave it my best shot to prove my point. "Can you just take my blood and check my hormone levels?" No. We don't really do that. Why do none of these doctors know about this?
What's so interesting is that a lot of, like doctors, OBGYNs will say, well, it can't be the pill because the pill is out of your system. You stop taking it, except it's the effect that we have to have wear off. And the effect can take months.
Although I left my OBGYN feeling extremely defeated, I at least got to keep those blue socks. If my doctor wasn't going to confirm this, then I guess the research was up to me.
When somebody's off and they're really feeling different, especially after going off the pill, their body may need some time to reset and re-regulate. So I would listen to a patient on the pill and especially off the pill because you don't know what's going on and they may be having a harder time rebalancing or re-regulating.
A lot of the time we're told that, oh, well, it's out of your system, within the month. But it's actually the effects aren't.
There's a lot going on behind the scenes in the body that you may or may not know is going on. But as the body's been on that medication for so long, we know with lots of, scientific data to support it, that it absolutely affects your brain, your liver, your gut, your total body level of inflammation. It affects your nutrient stores. So all of that is happening while you're taking the pill or whatever other form of hormonal birth control you're using. Undoubtedly, it's happening. Clearly, as some people come off of it, there are effects in the body that are lingering on past the last time they take that pill and throw the cartridge in the trash.
If the impact is so large, why is it so easy to obtain these pills? I started with wanting to figure out the ease of ordering a prescription. I've never had a problem asking and receiving the pill at the gyno, and I don't know anyone who has. To make it even more available now, popular birth control pill prescribing websites are available at our fingertips, approved by the FDA. With absolutely no intentions of taking these pills, I signed up to see what they would give me and what I could get away with. After filling out a basic questionnaire and putting completely false information in about high blood pressure, cigarette smoking, and some fungal infection, I was still able to obtain an estrogenic birth control. It was just too easy. One of the most important things they forgot to ask me was for a family medical history. My family carries the BRCA1 gene, the same gene that increases a woman's risk for breast cancer by 85%. How does that get overlooked?
In terms of getting your own birth control and prescribing for self, that may be doing a disservice for patients because it doesn't take into consideration their personal history and their family histories.
Crazy. They can do that.
Yeah, you can. And I went on after talking to her. It's insane. I stopped.
It's scary. It's
Yeah.
scary. It really is.
Yeah.
I do understand the motivation of wanting to make this easier for women. It's a hassle for us to manage contraception. It's a cost that men, our heterosexual partners, aren't having to bear. But on the other hand, we're not getting monitored sufficiently well. And the issue is that when we go to doctors, are we getting monitored sufficiently well there either?
How can I walk away unmonitored with an estrogenic birth control with such a high risk factor? It seems this little pill is so harmless, whether I'm at the doctor's office or behind my computer. But how powerful is this pill?
Birth control pills are incredibly powerful. Because women go and fill a birth control pill prescription for the effect that it has on preventing pregnancy, we tend to think about the effect of the birth control pill only in terms of its impact on the ovaries. But that's just not the way that hormones work. Hormones travel in the bloodstream and they go to every cell in the body that gets a blood supply.
The pill is powerful. I don't think people realize this. They just think the birth control pill is this little pill that they take once every day, and it's going to help with their PMS, or it's going to help prevent their pregnancy, or it's going to help keep them regular. But it's a powerful medication, and it has effects that can be lasting. And when you come off of it, it can really have, done a number to the body.
I'll give you an example of how powerful hormones are. So if we were to distill the blood of 250,000 fertile women who are at the peak of their cycle to extract estradiol, we would have a teaspoon of that particular hormone. That's how powerful hormones are.
I think it comes back to that whole, not recognizing what it's really doing. I mean, if we really had an appreciation for what it's doing in the body to these fundamental body systems in the long run, maybe we'd have more pause about just doling it out like candy and making a site where people just click and order. Yeah, because these are big issues we're talking about.
So it is the wave of the future to be online.
Yeah.
But where's the limit? You go on these apps, if you have high blood pressure and it flags yes or no, you check a no box, you may be able to get something that's not good for you.
If you look back at the Nelson pill hearings in 1970, even the doctors who were very much for the pill, they were huge pill proponents. Even the doctors who loved the pill suggested that women should be seen in follow-up visits every 6 months, every 4 months. One doctor even suggested every 2 months, because they saw how much the woman's body chemistry was changing on these pills, and they felt like she needed to be monitored very closely. And the idea that you can get these pills on the internet without being monitored at all is just ludicrous.
From pill hearings to online birth control prescriptions, how did we get here?
There was such a fear of overpopulation that people were willing to do just about anything to try to curb population growth.
In the 50s, overpopulation propaganda nearly frightened everyone.
Population explosion may lead to an explosion of a different sort. You may well find people of this country may rise in revolt against a system.
So the solution was the birth control pill. This powerful little pill, once named Novid, wasn't really created with women in mind. It was created in America, but the testing was done in impoverished countries such as Puerto Rico. Not only would pill endorsers visit women's homes, but they even made sure there was a pill clinic where they worked. These women had no idea what they were taking.
Fue por el año 55. Vino una enfermera a mi casa. Tenía un programa de, creo que era planificación familiar o algo así. Iba por los distintos apartamentos, enseñándonos ese tratamiento que había nuevo para evitar los hijos.
Ella pues se sentó y me explicó de las pastillas, cómo.
¿Qué ella le dijo?
Pues que era un método bueno para evitar los hijos. Y cogí el pote de las pastillas y me tomé una y no había echado nada al estómago. Entonces pues ahí cuando me tomé la pastilla pues sentí que se me fue el mundo y se me puso la vista como que se me oscureció.
La pastilla en ese año fueron las primeras mujeres en el mundo entero que tomaron las pastillas. ¿Usted sabía eso, Ana María?
No sé, se está experimentando con nosotros, con un ser humano, sin saber nosotros qué es lo que estaban haciendo.
Not only were human rights lacking, but women experienced severe symptoms and even death. Because of this, the dosage was lowered almost 10 times the amount before it was released in America on June 23, 1960. It was the start of the sexual revolution, and women were speaking up about their bodies. Major media was showing the new side of women's empowerment.
Don't forget to take your pill. I won't.
Although the pill had good intentions during the women's liberation movement, many were not convinced. It wasn't long before women started to question this little pill. And that's exactly why in 1970, Capitol Hill was in an uproar.
You all take the pill we handed out this morning. Everyone has a pill here. Then see how you feel about the questions that are asked. When you have one of those pills circulating through your body.
Women brought the issues they faced with this new magical pill and questions to Congress demanding a fair hearing.
Not only were we not told of the dangers of the pill, when we came in with problems, when we came in with side effects, we were told to go on using the pill.
This resulted in what's called the Nelson Pill hearings.
So Senator Nelson was doing these hearings called Competitive Problems in the Drug Industry, and he decided to look into the safety of birth control after it was brought to his attention by Barbara Seaman through her book, The Doctor's Case Against the Pill. In this hearing, they started looking into the safety, and as you read those transcripts, you can see a lot of the doctors, a lot of the key figures, the decision makers of the time, the politicians who were in control were so afraid of population control.
Funny enough, the Congressional Forum was made up solely of men. Absolutely no women of Congress were on the panel.
Are you objecting to the fact that there are no women testifying in this?
Yes, we are objecting to the fact that there are no women testifying and that there are no women on the panel.
When this first came out, and they would make the what I would call the withdrawal bleed. It would be set midweek so that a woman wouldn't have her period on the weekend by the male researchers.
At one point in the Nelson Pill hearings, when they're talking about breast cancer, Senator Nelson basically says, I don't understand. How can we say these things are safe when clearly they're not safe?
Breast cancer is the leading cause of cancer death in women around the world. When the pill was first introduced, approximately 750,000 women had breast cancer. In 1975, just 15 years after the birth control pill was made legal, the breast cancer rate jumped to 1.2 million. That's a 60% increase in breast cancer in just 15 years.
The doctor's response was essentially, this is the first time in history we've had to change the way we look at the benefit to risk. In this instance, we're looking at the benefit to society versus the risk to the individual woman.
If we fast forward to 2003, you'll see a 181% increase in breast cancer from 1960. The American Cancer Society claims that breast cancer is only 5 to 10% hereditary, and that the remaining 90 to 95% of cases are lifestyle caused.
It's been 50 years since the Nelson Pill hearings. It's time to revisit the Nelson Pill hearings.
It has been over 50 years, and the dosage is still standard and not individualized per patient.
So somebody of a normal body mass index may have a different processing as somebody that has an elevated BMI. At this time, there's not specific doses that are geared to people of different body mass indexes. So that's something in the future that we have to be wary of.
So I could be taking the same dosage as somebody that's 300 pounds.
Yes.
Because of the birth control pill, all medications now come with informative literature. It seems like we were making so much progress in advocating for ourselves, but was that enough? Unfortunately, women are also not told of the increased risks of cervical cancer. According to the National Cancer Institute, women using oral contraceptives for less than 5 years had a 10% increased risk. For those who have had a 5 to 9 year use, a 60% increased risk, and a doubling of the risk for 10 or more years of use. The good news is, these risks decline over time after stopping the pill. Studies have also shown that ovarian cancer and endometrial cancer risks are lessened with the use of oral contraceptives by 30 to 50% compared to those who have never used them.
There has been a theory in terms of how ovarian cancer develops from damage during ovulation, that by being on a suppressive therapy where you are not ovulating, that will give you protection from developing ovarian cancer when the pill is used for 5 years.
In a way, it's like trading one card for another.
The nature of them is that they don't isolate just that one thing. They do have an impact on all the parts of the body where we have, for instance, with estrogen, where we have estrogen receptors. These synthetic hormones will latch onto those and have their impacts. So this is happening every single day, that we either take the pill or that these hormones are working in our bodies. So to expect us to have no symptoms or no side effects is really ludicrous.
It's commonly known that hormones play a huge role in the promotion of cancer cells, specifically estrogen. I decided to work up an experiment of my own. Documented on papyrus paper in ancient Egypt were women urinating on wheat and barley seeds to see if they were pregnant. If those seeds quickly started to sprout, it meant the woman was pregnant. It may sound silly now, but in 1963, this was actually verified to be 80% accurate due to the hormone levels in the urinated soil. So it made me think, what would happen if we compared the growth of the seeds in a pregnant woman versus a woman on birth control? So I recruited my sister-in-laws. Amanda was 8 months pregnant, and Katie had been on birth control for almost 10 years when I took their samples. And I was on nothing and hadn't been for 2 years. I took the soil from the same spot in my backyard and filled all of the planters. I then took a bag of wheat seeds and evenly dispersed 2 teaspoons into each pot. I then watered each plant with a 1/4 cup of water. I took each urine sample and poured them into their own planters. I topped it off with some more soil and let the artificial light do its thing. About a week later, there was some growth. My plant had barely any growth. What baffled me was that a birth control user had almost the same amount of growth as a pregnant woman. I repeated this experiment 3 times, and all 3 times, I was shocked. Because of the presence of these hormones in our urine, it made me wonder, what else are they affecting on their way out?
So when somebody takes a pill, it is digested through their gut, circulated through their liver, and then redistributed.
The liver is the primary organ for detoxifying hormones in the body, and so that's a really big load on the liver to have to detoxify a large amount of synthetic hormones each and every day.
One body of research found that women who take the pill, while they're taking it, their level of a particular protein called sex hormone binding globulin is increased 10 times compared to women who have never taken the pill. So they've got 10 times as much of this particular globulin. What it does, the role of this globulin, is to latch onto testosterone in our body and take it out of our system.
Binding globulins are like buses. They're like buses that drive around your bloodstream and bind up hormones. I always say that hormones are like children. They can't be unattended at any time. And so they get on these buses and the bus drives them through the system. Now, what the birth control pill does is it increases the number of buses that you have. So now you have more buses, which means you have more hormones out of circulation and on these buses floating around. And it could affect the way that your body can use thyroid. It could affect the way that your body uses cortisol, your stress hormone. It could affect the way that your body uses testosterone.
So women also produce testosterone, nowhere near as much as men, but we do produce it, and it is important to us. It's understood to have an impact on mood, on energy, on libido, and quite possibly a range of other things. So if we're losing that to greater extent out of our system, it's going to have an impact. Now, one of the scary things that research has found is that even women who have stopped taking the pill, when they're tested a year later, they still have 4 times as much of the sex hormone binding globulin as women who have never been on the pill. So it can have a lasting and long-term effect. And we don't know if, in the case of some women, it actually never balances again. We don't know.
We know that it disrupts the gut microbiome as well as the vaginal microbiome, even the oral microbiome. So our body is just teeming with bacteria, and birth control unfortunately upsets the balance of those bacteria in all those different sites.
The microbiome is a collection of organisms within the gut. And unlike DNA, which were pretty similar from person to person, the microbiome can be up to 80% different from person to person. So in a healthy, normal patient, you're going to create estrogen, you're going to metabolize it, you're going to send it into the gut, and it's going to be packaged and excreted. The problem is if there's what's called dysbiosis or dysregulation of the gut microbiome, the bacteria in the gut is going to be unpackaged and it's going to be sent back into the body. And then you have too much estrogen, which can cause a vast array of problems like
cycle changes, mood changes,
leaky gut, which in turn can lead to things like immune dysfunction,
heavy bleeding, irritability,
libido changes, usually for the worse,
clotting,
weight gain,
anxiety,
digestive issues.
So there's so many potential issues with a dysregulated microbiome, specifically in correlation to estrogen metabolism and breakdown and excretion. So when you take a birth control, you're overriding that system altogether.
When you understand any amount of physiology, if you go messing around with the liver, the gut, inflammation, you're going to have lasting effects. And if you don't have nutrient stores to fuel all of those things, you're going to have effects.
And there's very clear evidence that the pH it's the pH in the gut that changes, and that has a sort of a cascade effect on how we absorb nutrition, and therefore in most cases, most vitamins and minerals that are impacted, our levels go down, and there are a couple that go up, like copper. So that can have an impact as well, and it can have over time, if it's out of whack, it can have a mental health impact too.
Oh, copper. Copper has an unusual relationship with the birth control pill. I read an article published by an anesthesiologist working at an Ivy League school in Pennsylvania. When a bag of plasma came into his operating room, he noticed the color of it was kind of different. Typical plasma is usually an orangey yellow color. What he saw was green. After sharing this finding with more than 30 medical professionals in his department, it was assumed that it was a bacterial contamination. And although he couldn't find any current information about green plasma, he found some old information dating back to the 1960s, and in fact, green blood was showing up quite often then. The donors? Young married women taking oral contraceptives. Why green, you ask? The pill increases copper levels in our blood. The carrier protein responsible for transporting copper creates a blue-colored solution, which in turn mixes with the normal yellow-orange plasma in our blood, and that is how your blood turns green. This bag of plasma that was delivered to this operating room was cleared by the American Red Cross based on a visual test. And although it was discarded, the blood was traced back to a 27-year-old female in excellent health condition with no underlying medical problems or medications, except for a 5-year history of oral contraceptive use. This poses a very real danger to a vulnerable patient needing blood when lying in the operating room. When I reached out to speak to this anesthesiologist, he agreed to be interviewed to shed some light on this subject. The school he worked for rejected his ability to interview, stating that his research is speculation and was conducted a long time ago. If all green blood donations made were from women on the birth control pill, do you consider that speculation? And also, is 2006 really a long time ago for a medical finding? Not only can excess copper turn our blood green, it can also have a huge effect on the brain. High levels of copper may even contribute to anxiety, panic disorders, sleep issues, paranoia, and in severe cases, psychosis.
The brain is one of the areas of the body that has the most number, like the highest density of sex hormone receptors of any other system in the body. And so when you take the birth control pill, even or take a birth control shot, right, anything hormonal, a hormonal IUD, a vaginal ring, right, all of those hormones are going to get into your blood supply and they're going to go everywhere that blood travels. And what this means is that it's going to impact a woman's body from head to toe, and the effects are not going to be targeted.
The combined or separate effect of copper and hormones on our brain has a huge effect on our mood.
By far, one of the most influential, sort of newer studies that has come out looking at the impact of birth control pill use on depression and anxiety was a study that was done on the women of Denmark, where they had this whole population of women between certain age ranges, 15 to 34. And they were able to look at women who filled prescriptions for birth control, whether or not that predicted a subsequent diagnosis of depression or a subsequent prescription for an antidepressant. And what the research found, especially for young women, so women ages 15 to 19, going on the birth control pills significantly increased women's risk of subsequently being diagnosed with depression or subsequently being prescribed an antidepressant. Follow-up research found having been prescribed and going on hormonal contraception significantly increases somebody's risk for a suicide attempt and then an actual suicide. And similar to what they found with the depression research, the hardest hit age group in terms of people who were impacted by this were these very young women, these 15 to 19-year-olds.
One of the things that I find curious is that when girls go through puberty, often even while they're still legally and technically children, we call them women. Suddenly they're women. And there may be some positive reasons for that because they have fertile bodies and they need to be managing that, and we need to respect and dignify that. But on the other hand, generally in pediatric medicine, so we're talking about children, the rule of thumb is to apply the least invasive therapy and then take incremental steps if those don't work. Whereas when girls become fertile, we tend to, as a society and the medical profession, but it's supported by the collective, is we want to deal with that as fast as possible. We don't want the danger of girls getting pregnant, even if on an individual case, they're totally unlikely to get pregnant, with little regard to the huge impact that this has on girls in a whole lot of ways, physically, emotionally, and socially as well.
Even Barbara Seaman, who was a feminist, she wrote that her husband was a psychiatrist, and a lot of psychiatrists believed that depression and suicide may actually be killing more women than strokes were.
Adolescent brains getting this, sort of unchanging hormonal message that you get from the birth control pill just isn't responding well. Sex hormones, given that they're playing a key role in sort of the organization of the brain into its adult phenotype, that suggests that when you put birth control pills into the system of these girls who are still developing, that it can influence the long-term sort of developmental trajectory of the brain. What is sort of a big question mark as of right now, and hopefully, this type of research will sort of be followed up on, is how does introducing the birth control pill during adolescence, how does this impact the way that the brain is then built? During the pubertal transition, your brain is undergoing a huge remodeling project during that time. And there is some research now that indicates that when girls are on the birth control pill during adolescence, that this appears to be associated with an increased risk of being susceptible to depression in adulthood, even after they're off of the birth control pill.
More recently, we've discovered that the hypothalamus located in the brain has significantly less volume in birth control users than in non-birth control users. The HPA axis, more commonly known as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, is largely important in our day-to-day hormonal functioning. I later learned the feeling of bees buzzing up my spine was a complete imbalance in my cortisol levels. The HPA axis is responsible for the output of these stress hormones. As Dr. Michael Lipton states, there's a lack of research on the effects of oral contraceptives on this small but essential part of the living human brain.
That trifecta sort of helps regulate our stress hormones, but it's also hugely central to producing thyroid hormone and producing reproductive hormones. So once any part of that sort of milieu is out of balance, then the rest of them are going to have to compensate. Sometimes when you're getting off of birth control, you can really shake that system.
We definitely hear this from my female patients who say to me, I went on the birth control pill for whatever reason, but now I feel like I'm less motivated, I'm less happy, I'm more depressed, I just feel kind of blah. And I'm like, yeah, I bet the pill is affecting that particular pathway.
When people have gone through chronic stress, so for example, when we look at people who have PTSD, what we tend to see is that they have a totally blunted or altogether absent cortisol response to stress. And the reason for this is their body has just shut down the stress response. And it's done this to prevent the body from basically dying in response to hypercorticalization, which again, it destroys brain cells and it can prevent investment in the immune system, which makes you a lot more susceptible to illnesses, decreases your investment in cell repair. So your body just can't even do its day-to-day operations. And that's why the body regulates cortisol response very tightly, because cortisol is really good in small doses. Like when we experience stress, it's like great that we experience a cortisol surge. That's what we're supposed to do. Helps our body cope with stress and manage the stressor. What we find is that women who are on the birth control pill, when you compare them to naturally cycling women or men, if you stress pill-taking women out, they don't get that dynamic increase in cortisol that every other sort of healthy, high-functioning, adult gets. Instead, they get this blunted cortisol response, which is, again, the type of thing that we tend to see in the context of PTSD. And it suggests that the birth control pill must be doing something to women's HPA axis that's causing it to actually shut itself down. And it's probably because there's an over response of cortisol signaling.
There's an overwhelming theme among women on the pill, whether you're in Denmark, America, or any other place for that matter. It seems we've all felt the same way about being prescribed the pill. Going to the gyno is like going to a pill cafe. Everyone is served the same menu with birth control as their entree and antidepressants for their dessert. And rarely do you find a practitioner that individualizes patient care when it comes to the birth control pill.
If you don't listen to your patients, then you're not a provider.
Right.
Yeah. You're a machine.
I've jumped on lupus forums before, and I read it all the time. And I think of one in particular that struck me, a woman who had gone off the pill. Her lupus symptoms got way better. She was feeling so much better. She lived that way for 4 years, and she decided to try birth control again. So she got back on a different formulation, and she started to have flare-ups again. Her lupus started to get worse. And she went to the doctor and said, "I think my birth control is causing this." The doctor said, "I don't think it's the birth control, but I'm going to give you Prozac to help you rest better at night so you're rested and you feel better." So rather than looking at her symptoms and looking at the facts that when she got off birth control, she was better, and when she got back on it, she wasn't better, he gave her Prozac. And that happens all the time.
Girls and young women will go to a doctor or a family planning service to be responsible about their reproductive health, their reproductive choices, and they go to those people as experts to advise them and help them with that. So the tragedy of that is that they're not getting a full perspective. They're not really anywhere near informed enough to be able to say, okay, well, I'm choosing this now, but with full understanding of what the side effects may be, and these are my other options, and I will also be looking at those. For instance,
I don't think birth control options are for everyone. And in terms of prescribing, if someone doesn't listen to their patient, then that might not be the right management fit for that patient and a provider. So I think it's very important that patients find the right fit for them and make sure that their contraceptive questions are actually being answered. And if it's something that is uncertain, that they go to the right place.
My sort of, a good rule of thumb, I think, is to only be on the birth control pill when you need to be on the birth control pill.
As a mode of convenience to prevent pregnancy, or certainly, again, the majority of prescriptions are not given to prevent pregnancy. They're for acne and other issues. I don't think it's acceptable to be prescribed, especially not at the volume that it is for those things.
Birth control oftentimes is given by doctors as an overall solution to cure all female hormones. And so that's really where, in my opinion, clinically, that's where the problem is, because the synthetic hormones that you're going to take from birth control are going to override your body's own natural ability to create and synthesize and break down hormones.
Where does it end? And really, where does it begin? It's commonly known that the pill increases the formation of blood clots. It kills approximately 300 to 400 women a year due to blood clots, strokes, and heart attacks. We have been proactive in the world of medicine for so many different issues. In 2017, meningitis killed 45 people. Why aren't we taking better preventative methods for hormonal contraceptive users? It's a common misconception for so many women who are told that the risks for blood clots are only increased for smokers. That doesn't mean that the risks are limited to just smokers. At Lucene Health Sciences, 87 women who suffered with an embolism while taking birth control were studied. 95% of those women were not smoking at the time of their embolism, and in fact, 78% of those women have never even smoked.
So for patients that have a very high risk for clotting in general, that estrogen component can increase their overall risk. So they are not candidates. So that's where that individual treatment becomes very important. There's not a standard protocol to screen every woman before they go on a birth control pill. If there is a family history or something that does screen as a higher risk potential, those individuals should be evaluated before they're going on a birth control, particularly ones with estrogen.
It is not considered cost-effective to check if a woman is predisposed to clotting risks before prescribing the birth control pill. Yet this genetic predisposition multiplies clot risks 62-fold in the first year. But that's not all that's overlooked in women's studies.
Women's health issues, especially things that are specific to women, things like the birth control pill, these things have been shied away from by researchers because they're more difficult to do. Research science is incredibly competitive. We have to publish as many papers as possible, as quickly as possible, and as cheaply as possible in order to sort of build our careers and make sure that we're able to fund the research that we're trying to do. And when you study things that are expensive to study and slow to study, there's a penalty that you take with that.
Why does there seem to be such a gap between research and patient care?
A lot of researchers are kind of afraid to look at the exact toll, the damage that's being done by the pill because they're afraid of losing their funding. Because pharmaceutical industry really controls a lot of the research right now.
I have noticed here that every time a study comes out citing some problem with hormonal contraception, the very next day, industry experts, and they're usually the same people, will come out in the same paper and say, oh yes, but there are many things that can cause this and we don't really know for sure, and any woman who's concerned must see her doctor and don't be alarmed, blah, 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 blah. So it's whitewashed, immediately. We just paper over it.
There are so many types of research questions that are still unanswered when it comes to the birth control pill. I think that what we know is just, it's just the tip of the iceberg. We know almost nothing about the way that individual pills interact with individual women to predict unique outcomes. And this is why some of us will hear crazy stories about our friend who is on this birth control that we ourselves love.
There are nearly 100 different formulations of the pill out on the market. Each pill falls into one of 4 categories, or more commonly called generations, based on its chemical makeup. Since studying 4 different generations means having to recruit 4 different groups of women large enough to study, researchers choose to assume one pill works the same as the others.
These progestins tend to be kind of trendy, and each of these 4 generations is molecularly different. And so there's every reason to expect that each of these different types of progestins are going to have different psychological effects on women, right? And so we don't know anything about that. Right now, most of the research just simply divides women up into one group or another, pill users versus non-pill users. So, for example, here in the US, most women are on 2nd or 3rd generation progestin pills. So it's pretty difficult to find women who are on 1st and 4th generation pills. Over in Europe, there's a lot more of a use of the 4th generation progestins. And so if you're doing research over there, you would tend to get a different bias in your sample. And in part, this is all drug company marketing, right? It's that the companies that, who's marketing where.
The birth control pill is $1 billion industry. Of course, the media plays a huge role. Originally, the pill was strictly for the purpose of preventing pregnancy, but now approximately 40% of the users subscribe to it for other symptoms because of heavy marketing campaigns.
Who look at the macro profile of public health. It's all on the percentages. It's not what's going to suit individual women. It's all got to be as cost effective as possible.
Today, the pill is classified as a lifestyle drug. This classification means that the focus is more on the economic and political power related to the pill rather than the development and research of the pill. Since 1970, drug research companies for the pill have gone from 13 to 4, which is why you're probably still taking the same pill your grandmama took. For scale, I found over 60 drug companies involved in diabetes research.
In a lot of ways, I think doctors are victims of the curriculum as well. The pharmaceutical industries, they control that message. They control the marketing. And after a doctor gets out, the CME credits are sponsored by drug companies. They just really control the message in and out.
Yaz grossed $700 million in 2009. That's almost 20% of all global sales for the birth control pill. This was attributed to the aggressive direct-to-consumer advertising campaigns. But this did not individualize patient care at all, which is why Yaz later lost over $2 billion in blood clot settlements.
Unfortunately, then it comes down to individual women to take more responsibility for themselves. We all could do with really more easily available information that really is across the board, that's genuinely about informed choice and not about selling products.
So many women are reporting these side effects, and instead, research is looking at other options, other birth control, newer birth controls, newer combinations of birth control when it comes to synthetic hormones. But I'm not seeing the research on what about risk? What about risk for autoimmune?
A huge piece of research that is missing from published medical journals is the possibility of birth control directly causing autoimmune. Right now, we see it as a correlation, even though, since the release of the birth control pill, autoimmune has tripled and it affects twice as many women as it does men.
So autoimmune diseases tend to run more commonly in women between their 20s and 40s. So those are the fertility window contraceptive patients. So did one come first or after? It's hard sometimes to separate.
What made you passionate as a man to, get onto this topic?
I got interested in the pill because I was doing some video work for a medical conference on autoimmune disease. And the keynote speaker the first night was considered the leading authority on autoimmune disease in the world. And as he spoke, he talked about how, we've known from the beginning estrogen plays a key role in autoimmune disease because of what it does in a woman's immune system. And nearly 80% of the diagnoses are women. And then he went on to explain T cells. You have these T cells in your body, they're like the soldiers of the immune system. They have receptors, estrogen attaches to that. Your natural estrogen gives it its marching orders, tells it what to attack, and arms it. But when something gets in our body and mimics natural estrogen, it attaches to those same cells, and suddenly the soldier's armed, but it doesn't know what to attack. So it begins to attack healthy tissue. And as he was describing this, I thought, well, he has to be talking about birth control. I couldn't think of anything else that gets in your body and mimics natural estrogen. And as he was speaking, I Googled rise of autoimmune disease. And I saw all these autoimmune diseases have just taken off since the early 70s. The more he spoke, the more I was convinced he had to be talking about birth control. So I went up to talk to him afterwards, and I asked him, exactly what role birth control played in all of this, and he said none at all. And I was shocked. I believed him because he was the world-renowned authority, but I was just in disbelief. And I said, it seems counterintuitive based on everything you just said. And he said, well, certainly there are more questions than answers, but no, there's never been any evidence linking birth control to any of these diseases. I was still thinking about it when I got back to my hotel room that night. I just picked lupus. I Googled lupus plus oral contraceptives, and I found this article on a new study that had come out that showed that women who take birth control are 50% more likely to develop lupus than women who never take it. And as I'm reading it, I thought, well, this is a new study. Maybe the doctor hasn't heard about this yet. Maybe he's not aware of it. And I get about halfway down the article, and there's a quote from him talking about the study saying, this doesn't mean women should stop taking the pill for some small increased risk of lupus. And I was so baffled and confused and angry that he had lied to me. And I just thought, how much worse would it be if I were a woman and I had been taking these drugs, and then I found out he was lying to me.
Altering these hormones can even have an effect on our partner selection.
So for more than 20 years now, researchers have been looking at the way that women's sex hormones influence who they are attracted to, and then also the nature of their sexual response. We know that estrogen predicts women's attraction to men who possess testosterone markers. So things like deep voices, square jaws, deeply set eyes, social dominance. We know that estrogen increases women's desire for sex, their interest in sex, and also how much sex they have. More recently, researchers then became really interested in how the birth control pill would influence these same processes, because the birth control pill, of course, keeps estrogen levels really low. And so, sort of a natural hypothesis that falls from this set of ideas is that pill-taking women might desire less masculine men as partners, and maybe even be choosing less masculine partners compared to women who are naturally cycling. And there's been research evidence now in multiple studies that suggest that this is in fact the case. This, of course, begs the question of what happens when a woman chooses her partner when she's on the birth control pill and then subsequently goes off of it. Because if the birth control pill is associated with changes in mate preferences, this suggests that for some women, if they choose their partner when they're on the pill, if they happen to choose somebody who doesn't have these types of qualities that they might desire once they're off of the pill, that this could cause problems. And there's some evidence now suggesting that this very thing might be going on. For example, in one study that was done where they followed samples of married couples, for women who were partnered to attractive men, going off the birth control pill actually made them even more satisfied with their relationship than they were prior to it. For women who were partnered with the less attractive men, though, they found that going off of the birth control pill then led to a subsequent decrease in relationship satisfaction. And so what this goes to show is that birth control pill use can influence partner choice, and that these types of choices can have long-term implications for women's relationship and sexual satisfaction, especially if they were on the birth control pill and then subsequently go off of it.
So basically, choose your partner off birth control.
Something else we've been looking into are theories surrounding the moon and women's cycles.
It's very interesting to note that in many traditional societies, there's always been an understanding that women's cycles have a relationship to the moon. And when we look at that now, we say, well, women's cycles obviously can vary in length. In any woman, often she might have experienced shorter and longer cycles. Some women are incredibly regular. When researchers look at, great numbers of women, they find that the average length of the cycle is around about the average length of the lunar cycle. Sometimes we think of the average menstrual cycle, or some women even think it should be 28 days. Partly, this has been sort of set more in concrete by the pill, which the pill packets generally are 4 weeks, 28 days. Interestingly, that the average is much closer to the average lunar cycle than the average pill packet. Some in the medical profession or the scientific community might see it as rubbish, but actually it's really interesting to note that there are many plants and animals who have a cycle that is clearly and through a lot of research has been found to be impacted by the lunar cycle, even in closed sort of environments where they're not getting any impact from light, they're found to respond to the lunar cycles. Our endocrine system is impacted by light, by magnetism. So certainly traditionally, where we weren't, for most of us now, we have electric lights at night, so when we can go whole months at a time and not really be aware of where the moon is. Traditionally, we would have perhaps been more impacted by the light of the full moon and the lack of light of the new moon, and so on. So this has an impact on our pineal gland, which can set in motion our hormonal cycle. It's known that women who live in polar regions have much more irregular menstrual cycles because they have whole blocks of time where there's no natural light. And similarly, blind women, because they're not experiencing those differences in light, they tend to have more irregular menstrual cycles. I have a lot more questions than I have answers. But I think I would certainly come down on the side that it's highly likely that we have an impact from the moon on our hormonal rhythms.
Not only may our environment have an effect on our bodies, but we too have an effect on our environment. Birth control is everywhere and kind of in everyone and everything. Even the animals at the zoo are on birth control. Between human and animal use, our waste byproducts have started to change certain bodies of fisheries. Fish have more estrogen receptors than people do. When a hormone user goes to the bathroom, the estrogen byproducts then trickle into the environment. Fish then ingest these hormones through the water. What we're finding is a large increase in the feminization of male fish. Some male fish are now indistinguishable from female fish, and some are now even producing eggs. And when the fish are introduced to these hormones at a young age, they become sterilized, ultimately leading to a decline in fish populations. We have a tendency as a society to downplay women's health issues. We are less studied, we feel less heard, and less understood. After 9 months of being off of the pill, I finally started to feel like myself again. The birth control pill exemplifies our lack of knowledge and our lack of commitment towards issues that affect us the most. Fortunately, we're not alone, but it's so important that we stay connected on this journey of advocacy for education, research, informed consent, and individualized patient care.
I think that we really need to push and advocate for more and better research to learn more about who we become on the birth control pill and even who we are when we're off of it. So that way we're able to make as informed decisions as possible about our health and who we want to be in our lives.
It's not for everybody.
Right.
So to be anti-birth control or pro,
Right.
You've got to be pro-patient. When
Right.
you're pro-patient, it's a success.
Let's not worry about who's Democrat or who's Republican or how it's going to affect this agenda or that agenda. Let's just agree that it's worth getting together to protect women.
In this whole field, given the length of time that we're fertile, we really need to develop the concept of fertility and contraceptive literacy, and to have ongoing education available that supports this whole idea of informed choice and agency and understanding our bodies and being able to know what methods are going to work best for us at different stages of our life, rather than going to health professionals that give us fairly mono version, and then we either follow that version or we're left on our own to kind of figure it out.
It's so true that children's song that we all sang, right? Like the knee bone is really connected to the hip bone. And by taking the birth control pill, it's not in a silo. It's not like take the pill, only affect the ovary. You take the pill and you affect everything from the hair on your head to the toenails in your toes. You just can't get around it.
Your toe bone connected to your foot bone's connected to your ankle bone, your ankle bone's connected to your leg bone. Let's shake them skeleton bones. Your leg bone's connected to your knee bone's connected to your thigh bone's connected to your hip bone. Let's shake them skeleton bones. Your backbone's connected to your shoulder bone's connected to your neck bone's connected to your head bone, let's shake them skeleton bones. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones are gonna walk around. Them bones gonna walk around. Let's shake them skeleton bones. Your head bone connected to your neck bone connected to your shoulder bone connected to your backbone. Let's shake them skeleton bones. Your hip bone's connected to your thigh bone's connected to your knee bone's connected to your leg bone. Let's shake them skeleton bones. Your leg bone connected to your ankle bone connected to your foot bone connected to your toe bone. Let's shake them skeleton bones. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones gonna walk around. Let's shake them skeleton bones. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones gonna walk around. Let's shake them skeleton bones.